Good morning, everyone. Well, almost afternoon. I am Iccha Sethi. I am a principal engineer at InVision. The past couple of years have been focused on back-end engineering, microservice architecture, event-based architecture, all areas of interest. And I am a new mom. So, fun fact, I submitted this proposal when my baby boy was a month old. And time flies, I'm here giving a talk in front of y'all now.
And I'm Jony Jeyaratnam, Director of Engineering at InVision. I've spent a lot of my time on the back-end side as well. Iccha talked about having a child. They had a child about 10 months old at that point, and that's our name of the talk, Growing Pains. So we both work at InVision, which is a fully distributed company, so we actually don't have offices, which is awesome every time I say it. People still kind of be like, really, where do you go? Where do you say headquarters? I'm like, my house. So as we talk today, we're going to talk about how to use architecture groups to scale people and technology as a mechanism. We'll be using a couple of tips along the way. One would be this ping you see, which would be a remote tip. As I said, it's in remote company, so we got to know the pros and cons, and we've kind of learned as we went through. Other one is in a more of a purple color. This indicates applies to all of you, regardless if you're remote or actually physically located.
I started at InVision a little over a year ago. At that point, there was already an architecture group in the company, but then it had been formulated for a younger InVision. When InVision was young, it was more focused on growth. All teams operated like mini startups, where their focus was like go, go, go without stopping to think. And we were distributed, remote. So teams weren't talking to each other or sharing knowledge. They were resolving the same problems. It's a common theme you've heard, like in the talk earlier about the North Star, that was one of the same problems faced by WeWork. The other problem we had was, because these teams were not talking, we didn't have good standards in place. And imagine a microservice architecture with tons of tiny services running. If there's an incident which happens and people are not using the same logging fields or metrics, all the issues and complications which can arise. So we thought about, okay, InVision has grown. We are like 150 to 200 engineers. We have so many microservices. What can the architecture group do now to help the company? How do we reassess our needs? We thought about what we needed. We wanted cross-team collaboration, people to talk to each other, learn from each other. We wanted some kind of standards in place. Remember, this was not at the cost of teams not being autonomous, but more like to help the velocity and help them give them guidelines, give them that lifeline to still not spend all the time refiguring out the same problems. And also, we wanted accountability. We were taking time to assess what we needed, right? We came up with we need standards, we need cross-team collaboration, but how do we measure that we're actually achieving those goals?
So one of the things we want to take away from this talk is not like a single bullet that's going to work for everybody. You need to assess your engineering organization. Some are, 10-people company. Their challenges are very different from the, 200 to 300 to the Amazons and Googles of the world. But I believe that we could use architecture group as a mechanism to scale. We just got to define different patterns. So, we believe that life without purpose, it's not fun. So just like anything else we take on. So we wanted to set purpose for this group as we started off. We wanted to be forward-looking. We wanted to make sure that we were pushing standards and best practices and using that to evolve our engineering culture. A good engineering culture leads into productive team, happy, moral, all that good stuff. But we also didn't want this group to be a gatekeepers. We don't want to slow things down. We didn't want to be this group that sat in an ivory tower and just handed out mandates. We wanted to create a very open philosophy and use that to build.
So this purpose that Johnny described, we had it written down in this one Confluence page. So why this was super useful was one of our architecture group members came up with a question once. This team is doing this thing wrong. Do we put our foot down and stop them from deploying or working on this thing? And then another group member was like, look, here's our purpose. We are not gatekeepers. And this was great because by putting forth your direction or your purpose, you're enabling your team members to make decisions without you stepping in. So, we set forth a purpose. We were like, how do we, stuff this architecture group? We wanted engineering representatives from all parts of the company. So we picked different functional areas, different business needs. We had SRE, platform, front-end, back-end engineers with different perspectives. One thing to note here was it wasn't their full-time job being on the architecture group. They still worked day-to-day in their team, and a percentage of their time was allocated to the architecture group. This enabled them to be the eyes and ears and actually on the ground and bring the feedback of the problems teams were facing and take our learnings back to those teams. These members were generally nominated by the directors or engineering leaders, so it was aligned with their career goals and paths, and we were making sure we were picking the right individuals. Another thing we did with this group is we did a staggered rotation. So there was always an influx of new ideas coming in, and whenever people felt they had too much on their plate, they could roll off this group. This group had a lead, which has been me so far. But one of my purpose and goal was to help make sure the group is focused. I'm there to steer them in the right direction to make sure we're meeting our purpose and goals. We had an engineering leader representative, which is Johnny here. He's the director of engineering. And it was really good having him amongst us engineers because he was our eyes and ears taking our concerns back to the leadership to make sure that these concerns were actually addressed as roadmap items. He also brought back to us the vision and strategy and the company and product goals the engineering leaders were discussing so that we were not flying blind and building this idealistic architecture or standards.
So, we had a purpose, we had a membership, all great, but it was a group of like 15-ish people. We wanted to make sure that, we were actually getting stuff done. We had accountability around it. So we spun a few rituals. One of them was weekly meetings. So we all got together as a group. We made sure that we had an agenda that was with how the record of all the things we discussed, important decisions that was made. We also made sure we had a note taker who was different from the facilitator. The facilitator ensured that the meeting ran smoothly, everybody got opportunity to speak, and kept us really on time because we tend to talk a lot. One of the things we also did as part of this was to ensure that we used Jira, specifically Kanban board, to manage. Because we had a lot of activities that we'll talk about later that were going on, and we wanted to make sure that we had a great way to keep status of those, make sure that those things we're working on, what we got discussed in these stand-ups and the weekly status meetings. And we used a swim lane model, which worked really, really well. The second thing we did was retros. This is something you're going to hear us talk a lot about. It's about learning and growing as we went through this journey. And I think that applies to a lot of the projects that we do and the theme that ran across the talks today. So we did a quarterly retrospectives. And one of the things that we learned from that was people were having a hard time finding time to do this because they were, so kind of a voluntary position along with other stuff they were doing. So we added a third thing into our rituals, which was an hour that got blocked off on everybody's calendar where this group got together and we will work through some of the tasks. It could be like doing architecture reviews, it could be writing best practices, and so forth. And that was a great way to make sure that people actually had time to do this work.
So like we mentioned, we're fully distributed. And imagine like 10 to 15 heavily opinionated engineers in one Zoom call trying to discuss, architecture topics. Have any of you been in Zoom calls like that with a ton of people? Yeah, right, lots of nods. Yeah, and lots of hands up. So we came up with this system, which is like, I'm going to call it the 1-2-0 system. If, say, somebody was talking, so say Mary's on my call and she's like talking, and I'm like, I really want to say something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one finger up. So everybody can see that in my Zoom call. So that means they know I want to go next. And Johnny really has an idea. He puts his finger 2 up. And so multiple people try to queue themselves up as speakers. That way, everybody gets an equal opportunity to voice their thoughts in the call. And if you want to quickly interject, you put up a 0, being like, I just want to add this one thing in there. So this has been really helpful for us. So if you're in remote calls with a lot of people, try this out.
I think this actually will work really well physically, too. I've definitely been in a room full of meetings where it was hard to get a chance to talk. So.
Yeah. And the thumbs up, sideways, and down, a lot more of you might have heard of, but if you've tried lean coffee-style meetings, this works well on Zoom, too. Like, if you are, want to talk more about a topic, we go with the thumbs up, wrap it up, and 1 more minute to wrap it up, and we're done. So this is helpful to make sure we're not bike shedding on a topic for too long. So these two remote tips have really helped us in our architecture meetings. I'm going to just keep, slotting in the slide of what we needed, just so that you keep that in mind as we talk about all the things we're doing. So we set up a bunch of activities, keeping in mind what we needed to do, and we're going to walk you through them today. Architecture reviews, projects, working groups, and office hours. Architecture reviews are fairly self-explanatory. Teams, when they come up with a spec, and if they want feedback, or if we use the DAYC format, which is decision matrix by Atlassian. It's been really good for making decisions for our team. They can add us to those if they want feedback. Again, we left it up to the teams to decide whether they wanted to involve us in this process. But we set forth a criteria or guidelines. We are like, you don't need to bring everything to us, but you think if you're adopting a new technology or it's a particularly complex problem, we'd recommend you bring this to us. We figured if the feedback we gave was good enough, they'd keep coming back to seek our input. Something went really well with this process, right? What you're building here is a group of engineers on the architecture group who understand end-to-end architecture. InVision has multiple products. It has multiple teams. It's sometimes hard to understand what's happening across the company. For us, we were building this pool who could then guide engineers, being like, you know what? You're running into issues with S3. This other team ran into issues too, and this is how they solved it. Go talk to them. Or have you considered using Aurora? So we could help teams give guidelines to teams like that. The hard part there was sometimes teams didn't know when to involve us or not. When we set loose guidelines of like, just involve us whenever you want. And the other thing was, I think, teams were still in that startup mode. Culture and mentality is hard to change. They were like, oh my God, if I involve another team in a review, it's probably going to slow my process down.
So for the leaders in the room, both managers and lead engineers, please encourage your team to partake in these architecture reviews and help guide them when to make sense to take it versus decide within the team. Because I'm a big believer that, and actually we are a big believer that seeking diverse input actually helps us build better system, better architecture that's more resilient. Also, my favorite thing is to learn from other people's mistakes when I don't have to make them, and architecture reviews are great. I'll wait to learn that. Next thing is architecture projects. We talked about getting the group and talking and all the stuff, but we didn't want to be a group that just talked and talked and talked, but actually didn't deliver as well. So we set goals at the end of start of every quarter on things that this group will tangible deliveries they will have. One of such a thing we launched was engineering handbook. We had best practices and requirements that were kind of scattered around our wiki. We wanted to make sure that it was easily consumable for our engineers, but also they were accurate. So we took the initiative to audit all of them, made sure that they were using the right language. So for example, we followed the RFC format to make sure the requirements were explicitly called out as musts versus best practice were like, you should use this or you could use this. And that really helped unify all this content, made it simpler and easily accessible to the rest of the audience. So what went well with this? Really great engagement from the group, a lot of ideas, a lot of things people wanted to work on. We used the Kanban board to project manage, which I think really helped a lot. And we delivered, despite it being slower than we liked. And that kind of goes into where we could have done better, is really the time commitment. Like these engineers was just part of their job, not their core focus. And it's something that you will hear kind of a big challenge that we've seen through this is that time commitment part.
And when we started, saying that, oh, we want to, revamp our engineering handbook or build a new one, we just said, okay, let's just rebuild this, and that was our goal. And quarter in, quarter two, though we were doing work in there, it didn't feel like progress to us because we'd set up such a big goal to achieve. So in the recent quarter, what we learned is break down your goals into small milestones or achievable targets, where we set forth specific goals saying these are the areas we want to address in the handbook, and we assigned specific owners to them. So break down your project into small deliverables and assign ownership to it. That we achieved, we went beyond our target we set this quarter for the content we wanted to add to our handbook. So the third activity we want to talk to you about is working group. This has been one of the most challenging activities of this group, to be honest with you. So working group is not a new concept. Yesterday I was talking to Matt from Etsy. They have working groups there. The W3, big organization, has working groups there. In several places it's been successful. But at InVision, I'll talk about some of the challenges we faced with working groups. So the concept here is you take a cross-cutting concern, something which impacts multiple teams, and you have people from different teams who are passionate about that topic come and be part of the working group and find a solution and possibly even implement it. One of the big advantages of a working group is you're bringing perspectives from engineers from different teams onto this working group. You get to work with people you haven't worked before, so this is a good opportunity for mentorship and learning from each other. The process we follow for a working group is any engineer in the company can submit an idea. So that's the proposal phase. When we launched this, oh my God, we had so many great ideas come in about things we could improve across our engineering. The architecture group goes through the process of reviewing these proposals and selects the ones we want to target for this quarter. Then the lead of the working group, that's the engineer who submitted the proposal, is like, yes, my proposal is accepted. I'm going to do a call for participation. That's the next step. And say an engineer who's interested in this topic and wants to participate in this working group, the first thing they do is they're supposed to go talk to their manager. The reason why is to be a part of this working group, there is a defined percentage of your time you're supposed to allocate to this working group. Say a day or two out of the week. So your manager has to be okay that you're not going to be contributing that time to your day-to-day activities on the team. Once the working group is all set, they go into working mode, into the draft phase, which is basically coming up with different possible solutions for the problem statement set forth in the proposal. They come with these suggestions to the architecture group. Like an example is we had an events working group going on last quarter, and they had different solutions for how we should store our event schemas. Different registry options, et cetera, et cetera. They brought forth these options to the architecture group. We reviewed it, and we're like, okay, I think this is a good option for you to pursue. And they went into the next stage, which is the candidate phase. So you focus your energies on that final solution, and in the finished phase, you hand it over to a long-term owner. We didn't want these solutions, the solution the working group has come up with, to be abandoned. We wanted a long-term owner so that it would continue being useful to the engineering org. Like I mentioned, people were very excited. Lots of good ideas came out. We got together people from different parts of the company who were passionate about a topic and talking to each other. So a lot of that cross-team sharing of knowledge about the problems they were facing on that topic was happening. The hard part here, again, was when you tell somebody, an engineer, who's mainly embedded in a team working on a product, that X% of your time is going to this other activity, they do great for the first week or two. And then every time they go back to their team stand-up, their team activities, they feel like they're not contributing as much to their primary team. And what happens is then the working group item slides off because their manager is not a part of the working group. Their manager is seeing their day-to-day work on the team. So we found it hard for the engineers to self-balance their time commitments on the working group. And one of the other challenges was you had to make sure for that long-term ownership, you think about it in the earlier phases because you have to make sure whoever is going to be a long-term owner of the solution has time and space on their roadmap to take it on.
So one of the things I think we actually did well with the working group is how we did retros. So these were independent groups that ran. We had 4 groups. But what it is that when the first group finished and they ran a retro on the things that went well and things that didn't go well, we actually took those learning and then applied to the subsequent working groups, even though they were led by different folks. One of the things we learned from is when you have 15 volunteers in a group and doing that, not everybody was able to allocate the same time, which both slowed down the project and also just lowered the morale of that group because they felt like everybody wasn't pulling the weight. So the events working group we actually did is that even though we had an interest group of 15-ish people, we had a more focused core group within that we knew that it could actually make the time to do the work, and that showed uptake in terms of their delivery and also the morale of the group. I get to talk about the one activity that won the best out of all 4 of them, which is the office hours.
Yeah, Johnny, how do you get to talk about our successes and I get the challenging topics, huh?
Sucks to be you. So
Directors.
with office hours, what was it? We wanted to make sure that we had a forum where people could come and have open technical discussions. We also wanted to make sure that people could present their technical ideas, like either they just learned how to stress test their Aura instance and they have lessons that could be shared, or new architecture around events they were working on, or async. So there's a lot of interesting things happening in the company. We wanted to create a forum where people could come and present. We also wanted to make sure it was accessible to all of engineering. We ensured that there was a DRI who was responsible for organizing these. The nice part of having that is that set up a Confluence page, had all the talks were getting published ahead of time, was communicated across all our Slack channel to create awareness, and then we would also record it and link it there for record keeping, so anybody who missed it could go and watch it. So what went well with it, right? It was a lot of engagement from the engineering org. Routinely, we had 50 to 60 people joining. Great discussion also in our Slack channel on top of that. Besides the architecture presentations and knowledge sharing, there was also great open technical discussions, like why do you need BFF, when to use it, when not to use it. For the folks in the audience, BFF is not best friends forever, but backend for front end. And that actually led to us taking an action item, said we're going to write best practice on BFFs, which we recently just published. So this has led to actual concrete action items as well. In terms of what didn't go so well, since we're super awesome, actually everything went pretty well on this one.
This comes to a remote tips section from this activity, right? So what I've seen tons of remote companies do well is have team happy hour, where you just hang out on a Zoom call and talk about random topics. But the architecture office hours had some empty slots, which were almost like architecture office hours. These were the replacements for your hallway conversations, or you grab a lunch with someone from another team and talk about a topic. We said, this is an architecture office hours, but just discuss the problems you're running into. And it was more of a fixed time and a fixed topic theme, but still had unstructured questions and discussions coming in. So this has been really useful for us if y'all want to try it out.
You can still bring beer and drink, it's fine.
The other thing we do is we record every meeting, right? It's really easy to record on Zoom, and especially if you are a remote employee and you can't make it to that call for some reason or that meeting for some reason, you can always watch it later at 2x speed. So I've done that sometimes, and it's been really useful for me. Coming back to what we needed, right? Cross-zone collaboration. We have a ton of that with all the activities we set up. Our membership model set us up for cross-zone collaboration from the working groups, office hours. All these things helped people across the engineering org talk to each other. With our engineering handbook, we had standards in place, and we continue investing in that initiative. We touched a little bit on accountability. And Johnny, do you want to talk a little bit more on this, about how we made sure we were accountable? Yeah.
Definitely. We use a framework called OKRs. This is actually used across the InVision. It stands for Objective and Key Results. This is how we set goals in terms of what we want to achieve. We do it on a quarterly basis. This helps both hold us accountable in terms of what we're going to deliver, share with the company, what's coming ahead, so get them excited, alignment as well, and also, make sure these OKR align with our overall vision or North Star. So these are some of the OKRs that we had set up along the way, right? One of them was launching the engineering handbook. Another one was writing new BCPs that will go into it. BCPs, the best current practices. And with these, we also made sure each of these had a DRI, directly responsible individual. And we also made sure to score them. We would do a midpoint check in the quarter just to see how we're progressing and get a score, and then score toward the end. So scoring is kind of trivial. Some people still get confused. 0 to 4, it's you're actually not getting where you want it to be, versus yellow, you're making progress, not quite there yet. 1.0 to 1.4 is you're hitting the goal and going above and beyond. And if you give yourself anything above that, you're just really killing it. And we had a couple this quarter that we actually killed and a couple not so great.
Okay, OKRs have been around for a while. Companies set them. I've seen some companies have OKRs translate down to teams. But what we did is architecture group we have is not an official team, but we still set OKRs. So no matter what initiative you take, I'd recommend using this strategy to make sure you are keeping your group accountable for your deliverables. So level setting, right? We've been running this group since the beginning of this year, so it's been almost 10 months. And we kind of got together and we were like, okay, through the process, we iterated, we got better. But we are like, okay, now it's been 10 months. What's been going well? Where can we improve? So things that went really well were we at least know what the problems in our architecture are. Like instead of teams being in silos and not knowing what's wrong, you know what's going wrong because people are talking about it. We started having the engineering handbook and standards in place. And also definitely our engineers across the team, outside the architecture group, we're talking to each other and learning from each other. So in all those aspects, we've done really good so far.
This is where I get to talk about growth areas. So one of the things you probably heard, it's surprise, surprise, lack of time commitment. That came from the fact these members had other day-to-day responsibilities, which also led to focus, right? So when they were showering or going for a long walk, they were not thinking about the architecture and the bigger pictures. They were thinking about more at their team level challenges. So the way we are addressing that is we actually dedicating engineering resources for the architecture groups. We have a team of 3 and actually growing that are going to focus on building libraries and standards who are day-to-day job is to think across this level. We're also converting these working group models into interskills because they were bringing a lot of insights, especially from the ground up. We want to make sure that didn't get lost, so we want to create that forum as well. The second challenge we had is we wanted to create opportunity for everybody. So we picked people that were individual teams, either lead or staff engineers. But the challenge is that at their director level or their small organization level, they didn't have broad visibility into what was happening. So a lot of the concerns they were bringing up were specific to their squad, so obviously teams, so some would get more attention than the others. So one of the ways we're fixing this is to encourage these folks to have skip levels with their directors on a regular basis to get that broad, but also meet with the tech leads or managers to understand what's going on outside of their team as well, and then bringing that back into our group. We're also spinning up a more focused core group within architecture, which will consist of principals who are already operating at the org level with the goal of thinking broader and bigger picture as well.
And if we've learned something through this process and were to leave you with one final tip, it would be step 1.
Evaluate. Step 2.
Iterate.
Step 3. Keep redoing it. You're going to learn, keep retro,
we need to get better at this. We need to iterate on this. Thank you, everyone. We'll be at the office hours, and if you have any questions, come say hi to us.
Thank you so much.